Welcome to Artificiality. This is Dave Edwards.
And Helen.
Great to have you here with us today, listening. We have a conversation coming up with Maria Axente from PWC about AI ethics and how they think about that at PWC and how she works with AI and AI ethics in a variety of also nonprofit settings, so very interesting. Wanted to start off the podcast today, though, with a bit of conversation about Facebook's acquisition of Giphy. So what do you think about this?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people, this is the discussion has been around how it's sort of an antitrust position and yet another example of Facebook hoovering up more data. But I was more interested in why and what's really specific about Giphy that is different. And at the same time as they talked about the acquisition and about meaningful and creative ways that humans express themselves through memes and the visual text combination that's so distinctive, that the same thing was appearing on the AI side of things as they talked about AI and hate speech moderation, which because of COVID has been a lot more reliance on AI for hate speech moderation, while humans concentrate on COVID moderation, misinformation. And digging into the AI, and I watch AI out of Facebook quite a lot because it's really pretty interesting. They've always had a really unique, use case driven approach to how they develop their AI. Even right back in 2016, they were pulling together the colloquialisms of the way that people post and talk on social media meant that their AI had to really focus on different kinds of things. And that's still true today. And that's what we're seeing, this long, ongoing continuation of that strategy. And I think it's all starting to come together pretty nicely when you look at their AI research and this Giphy acquisition, because what it allows them to do is this massive data set of essentially hidden meaning. And hidden meanings from everything from juxtaposition to humor to all sorts of things to irony.
Yeah.
And I went through a whole, I searched on ironic and irony and Giphy, and there was just so many great examples of humor that AI would just never understand. One that I didn't put in the newsletter, but that really amused me though was 3 cars crashing into each other in the middle of an intersection. Not an injury kind of accident of people wearing seatbelts, but definitely sort of slightly disturbing. And they all sort of spun around a bit and were facing in different directions. And then the trunk of one of them popped open and a bunch of balloons came out. And it's that's just so funny. But an AI would never understand why that was amusing.
So do you think it's possible that Facebook's AI will start to learn the sort of hidden meanings?
Well, yeah, I think I personally think that's the goal. It sort of makes sense to me when you look at the other strands of AI. So the other strands of the AI research that were coming through that's so interesting is that, and Google's done this as well, these massive new neural network models built off of BERT that are able to basically find hidden structures in language. And so things that exist in English in space, if you like, in that hyperspace, can be found in other languages. So you really only need to learn one language. And as someone who has only ever mastered one language, and that's English, that feels oddly like a privacy invasion.
Yeah.
I'm sure it doesn't if you're fluent in multiple languages. You wouldn't have that same sort of sense. But for me to think of an AI that can take structures in English and apply it to all other languages in the world at the speed and scale of AI is kind of creepy. But it's obviously good for Facebook. It's obviously good for moderating hate speech and tracking across different languages. And so I think that's pretty interesting. And the other one is this, it's something I've been looking at with Facebook for at least 6 months, some very interesting way that they combine text and visual, and they basically have this synchronous learning between a language model and a visual model. And in the blog release on the AI stuff that they talked about, specifically talk about these fusion models and combining not just vision and text, but also offline and other sources of data. And when you put all of this in with this much more nuanced, creative, ironic, humor, juxtaposition, dog whistle, whatever it is, version of meaning, you're really kind of creating a superintelligence or a brain without saying it.
Well, you're also creating something that's fascinating in that from the human side of it, it increasingly becomes something you can't hide from. You think about having sort of in-jokes between people that can extend up to huge categories of people with this concept of a dog whistle, right, that only the people inside understand. But if an AI is actually able to understand that hidden meaning, you have no ability to communicate in a way that the AI can't understand, right? So for people who are trying to communicate in a way with a wink or a nod or a little coded word that maybe their kids don't understand, like we do that, or they have a conversation among friends that the other clique doesn't understand, or they're a whole category of society that's trying to hide from government. If Facebook's able to understand all of this hidden meaning inside of GIFs, inside of all of these other kinds of strange uses of language that we've developed that are not proper and standard, we can't communicate without the AI actually understanding what we're saying.
Yeah, it's kind of the ultimate listening surveillance.
It's the ultimate surveillance,
yeah,
right? It's the ultimate Big Brother moment that you can't come up with hidden ways without the machine knowing.
Yeah.
And if you're a conspiracy theorist, this should be the thing that scares the most out of you.
Well, and this is sort of beginning to feed on itself a lot more. I mean, when way back when we first went into journalism, when we went into courts, the kind of overarching standard was to not pay attention to these sort of fringe conversations, because that would pull things into the mainstream and give them credibility. And I was looking at some research recently that said that COVID has taken those kinds of fringe things from an average of like 6 months to get into the mainstream to like 21 days or something. So there's this desire to find out what's happening on the fringes and bring it into the mainstream, and the AI is going to make that just happen even faster. I mean, I imagine what it's doing with the red pill, blue pill conversation right now.
Yeah, it's going to be understanding it. Maybe we'll have a new line of business of helping people be able to communicate without words. Our kids have a thing that they'll look at us and say, "You're doing it again. You're talking with your eyes." So that's maybe the only way to actually hide from the machine, is to not actually say anything and just communicate with our eyes until the machine can actually read our eyes.
Well, of course, sometimes we're not saying anything, we're just screwing with them. So that would also be fun.
It would be. It'd be nice to screw with the AI. All right, well, this has been great. Let's move on to the conversation with Maria Axente. We very much appreciate her time. She's got a really interesting perspective coming from a company as large as PwC, and the work that she's doing with UNICEF is really fascinating. So please enjoy our conversation with Maria. All right, well, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. So if you could start off, why don't you give our listeners a bit of an understanding of what you do at PwC?
Yes, of course. So I work at PwC UK, which is one of the member firms within the PwC network. And my role is to look after responsible AI, which is in PwC both a framework of deploying AI, but also a suite of tools that is related to that framework. And in a nutshell, responsible AI looks at how to best embed values that are relevant to a specific organization in the autonomous system we're building, making sure that those systems are well governed, and also the risk element is properly considered and managed in an end-to-end situation. My role is a little bit, I would say, unusual, because my clients are both internal and external. So I work with our internal development teams and data science colleagues to make sure that the products and services we develop encapsulate those principles, but also focus on working with clients across industries on those issues and try to anticipate and help clients with their problems around responsible and ethical AI.
That's great. I mean, one of the things that often we get asked is like, what is AI ethics and why do you need it? And why is AI different? Why do you think AI is different?
That's a very interesting question to start with. And I think it's a question we should ask ourselves every single time we have those conversations. Since I started working in AI, one of the key challenges is that everyone is using a different taxonomy and definition, and therefore we create a lot of confusion about what we're talking about. And it starts with what AI is, and then link with AI, it's the question of ethics and what is AI ethics, and if we have an AI ethics or we have ethics for AI. And I'll break the answer in two. First of all, we should start acknowledging that AI is not simply a technology. When we talk about AI, we acknowledge is a combination of technologies that it encapsulates both autonomous type of technology, but also the traditional components of a technology, the front end, the back end, the middle end, the infrastructure, the connectivity. But also this time, we're talking about a context that this technology operates that has much more significance in the way it operates and produces outcome the technology had before, is because of its autonomous and intelligent traits, meaning that it operates independent from human supervision and it gets to pick up clues about the external environment and being able to update or adjust the outcome and behavior based on that. And with that, I think it's a statement we're trying to make in the AI community with the ISA world is a shift in definitions. AI is not just a technology. AI is a complex economical, social, and technological context, and we need to address it with this view. The second part is, what is ethics? Again, we need to kind of define it for ourselves. I think I agree with a lot of colleagues have done fantastic work in the field that there is not a specific field for ethics or AI ethics. We have ethics and values in general, which now we need to translate into the world of autonomous systems that more and more operate without human supervision, but at the same time, they tend to have an increasing impact on our lives. And with that, there is an expectation that those autonomous systems should have the values that bring us together and allow us to work harmoniously, but it's not. So the big job we have in front of us is to be able to distill the values that are applicable in a certain context, society, organization, or group, into a black and white 1 and 0 approach that is codifiable through software development. I would say, in a nutshell, there's no thing as AI ethics are the values we seek to embed into autonomous systems that we define or that will aim to behave as a form of intelligence.
Yeah, when you describe it like that and instantiating human values into autonomous systems, part of the problem is that there isn't necessarily a single set of human values. And so, and being in Europe, you almost appreciate diversity as just sort of part of the formation of the union in many ways, of the EU. And so how do you think about sitting down with clients and walking them through that complicated discussion? Because a lot of people are pretty impatient about that. They might either just want to like the simple answer, or they want their answer, or they want someone else's answer, or they want no answer.
But I think there's another excellent question, and I think this is where the AI community needs to start and show its value, and especially those truly ethicists. So many of us, even myself, I can't claim I'm an ethics expert because I'm not. I don't have the formal education, but we do have people who have been studied ethics and philosophy and could help us have those conversations that would lead to some sort of reflection of what values and whose values and how. The way we approach it is a little bit more simplistic because obviously we don't have the bandwidth to carry all those philosophical debates. So we're trying to find the right balance in between enough introspection and reflections on ethical matters and the action they need to derive from this reflection that need to translate into organizational initiatives. We have developed a process like every consultant will do. You know that we love our processes and PowerPoints. But we think that this is a logical way of approaching or translating or trying to translate a set of values into concrete actions. And in a nutshell, the process is looking at the following. On one hand, the ethical theories we have available, virtue ethics, utilitarians, and all contextualism. Can't even pronounce it properly. But on the other hand, we're looking at specific set of values. In one case, could be a general level. We have the human rights, which is the generally acceptable human values that everyone in the world has signed up for in 1949. But that's to showcase that we actually have a set of values that everyone agrees upon, regardless of where they're coming from. But when we go to a narrow focus, which is an organizational level, even if they operate globally, themselves they have a set of values and principles that are embedded into their culture. So we'll say, if we work for big banks, for example, so what are the core values and principles the bank has instilled in everything they do, and we'll take those as the values they stand for. And this is where probably we can find a lot of challenges if those values are right or they're articulated in the right way and how well they are implemented. But we're trying not to go on that route because I think our ultimate aim is to create some sort of an approach that is tested at work for translating a value that's quite abstract into something that it's quite tangible, which is a set of action. So after we look at what ethics theories we have available plus what the values, the next process is to look at what ethical principles we could choose from and will be valid for the specific organization. And we did a bit of a market analysis. We scanned 100 and something different ethical documents, code of conduct or principles that have been drafted by a range of organizations from supranational, like European Union, all the way down to corporates or a research institute. And we've collected 155 different ethical principles. And from there, we went through a process of distilling and aggregated them in 9 meta-ethical principles. And you say, regardless of you coming from and your context, you still have those 9 meta-ethical principles that you can choose from. And because it's a traceability in between those 9 meta principles and the 155, when we work with a client, we say, which one do you want to choose? Is either the distilled one, or you can pick and choose the ones in the industry or in the private sector, and you can link your principles with a document that you think it's the most relatable to your organization. So, for example, we did this with an European client, and they choose to use the European trustworthy AI principles. And the output of this, it's a set of principles that the organization is now seeking to validate with their internal stakeholders. And the last stage is operationalizing it. Is how do you embed those principles in throughout the life cycle of the application, and you go well and beyond the application development, and you go deep into the culture and those parts that impact and contribute to the development of the AI. And that's the hardest bit. And I would say that 2020 is by far and should be by far the year of operationalizing ethics, is bringing it to life. We have the principles, we have the thinking. Now it's about the doing. And this is where you're going to see so many different avenues of doing it, and they're all right. And maybe I hope that at the end of the year, we will all come together and share those best practices and share what has worked and what hasn't worked, and where do we need to pay a bit more attention. I would say ethics this year should become much more practical, move from the philosophy realm into the practical realm. And with the practical realm, the big question comes is like, how do I demonstrate ethics works? How do I demonstrate that ethics is valuable for my business, other than, yes, all good business is an ethical business, or ethic business are a good business? We have to go to a bit more tangible discourse.
How do you help people, like how do you think about getting people through that conversation so that they understand that they're, like, how they treat fairness, or how they, like, should they treat people who have pre-existing conditions and need different advice? Is it fair to treat them differently? Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We've just highlighted another big element of bringing ethics to life, which is a fundamental mindset change, right? So ethics will trigger a profound cultural transformation that requires people to start thinking differently and acting differently. And for that to happen, we need to have, on one hand, the support of the leadership, who needs to buy into the need for change, and also support from the ones that are involved in this process to start approaching things in a different way. And that's when I said it's going to be a long journey for operationalizing ethics. It's not just about designing a process as a policy. It's making sure that you recognize or embedding ethics is recognized as a long cultural process that needs to be treated as one that has the same fundamental as any major change program, that will encompass for time needed for people to be educated and upskill on that, for those new ways of thinking to be trial and tested, and for a close feedback loop on what works and doesn't work. Otherwise, we will see a bit of success, like in every change management program, that spike of interest that usually happens when you deploy something new. But then if it's not sustained properly, you will see a dramatic drop in it, as we've seen with the adoption of a specific technology, for example, in enterprise. So I think we have to think long term, because we are after a fundamental change of what we're thinking. And the biggest challenge ahead of us is not as much of the change is going to trigger or the technology we need, or how do we design this technology, is the fact that the changes are going to something, I would say, fundamental to our world, which is how power is being held and acquired. And that's why so many researchers have highlighted the danger of ethics washing as a true political battle, is because values have been used to accumulate or to justify the accumulation of powers. And now, with the technology that makes the world much more transparent, on one hand, we shed light on those power structures, and in order to have fair outcome, we need to go to the root cause of the problems, and technology is not the problem. It's a reflection of the power structure that exists, is a manifestation of a current status quo that we need to be challenging.
If you're targeting leaders, then how much do you think ethics relies on those leaders truly understanding how AI works? Because if you don't understand its probabilistic nature, or you don't understand the way that, if you think it's like the Terminator rather than very, very high dimensional pattern recognition, if you like, and correlation discovery, then it's pretty hard to get your head around why you'd need to think about AI as being as dynamic and as autonomous as it actually is.
It's true. It's going to be a challenge in itself to upskill the decision makers on what AI truly is. But perhaps we don't need to go that far. Perhaps we don't need to expect every CEO to be a master of understanding AI. And there's we went around the block, at least in UK, to identify, but what exactly decision makers need to know about AI. And this is a continuous debate, and I think some still advocate for them to be immersed into a machine learning course to really understand how it works. Others say maybe they just need to understand how it operates and what's the outcome. But there was something interesting that has happened during the current crisis in UK, and without going too much into the details, it was a narrative that we got from the UK government saying that behind the decision they make in relation to how they approach the crisis was the scientific advice. And with that, it's almost like putting the scientist on spot and saying, even ourselves as a business leader, we acknowledge that we don't understand the complexity of the situation, so we will rely on your expertise to help us make those decisions. So I wonder if this type of attitude will not be seen in the business leads, and given the fact that a lot of the business executives have their own advisors on various topics, if we want to see the surge of expert advice on AI that will advise the corporate boards and the leaders on certain decision and option in relation with technology, with that the ethical consideration, which are sometimes hard to comprehend, even if you are willing to make the change. And there's the second element you mentioned. Yes, we are targeting or we aim a change in attitude to those that hold power, then that's always going to be a challenge. But hey ho, it's we are up for the challenge, and we know that there are good apples and bad apples when it comes to leaders. And whilst we set up an example, we are hoping to make it a standard, and we hoping that we'll make it a standard everyone will aspire to get to, and they will be forced to. So at this point in time, I'm hoping that we'll have good leaders that will lead by example with the application of AI, and that the others will follow. Of course, this is somehow, I would say, maybe a little bit over optimistic approach, but we have to have this approach. Otherwise, we wouldn't go too far, because yes, you're right. We are aiming something quite daring, a Mount Everest in front of us, but at the same time, the stakes are really high. I think by not trying to do this, we know AI is going to enhance everything, is going to be working around or with. So we can't afford to do this. It feels like it's one of those moments in humanity that it's not a question if we do it. We just have to go and do it and see how far we're going to go.
What do you find is the best way to communicate with a leader who's skeptical that it's worth the effort and investment and time to pursue creating an ethical approach to their AI projects?
Oh, I love this question. Absolutely love this question. And believe it or not, it's on my back of the mind all the time, because I'm being challenged by my colleagues and my bosses on the same thing. Why is ethics important? And my answer is, although it's simple, I will elaborate it later. Is speak their language. Try to find out what in fact is what they are motivated. What is the fact the indicators they are looking to monitor, or what's the success factor they're trying to achieve, and translate ethics into something that it speaks their language, if you want. So I'll give you an example. So if you are a finance or CFO and you only speak dollars in terms of the margins and EBITDA, you need to be able to look at ethics as contributing with real numbers to that volume. And it's a difficult task, because I think it's easier to say at the product level, we can set up a certain definition of fairness and being able to quantify how fair a model it is, but to link it back to business indicators that are translated into financial might be a little bit more difficult. but this is ultimately something that a CFO will understand. Will say, and also. Another way is to identify the risk associated with unethical behavior. And some of the organization and industry that are quite mature in terms of managing risk, it's easy because they understand that the risk associated with new venture might have a significant impact on many areas of the organization. Where this education or awareness of risk doesn't exist, it's an opportunity to highlight the fact that with great potential, you have great risk, and being able to articulate what those risks are, and again link it back with the performance of the organization. And even if it's not the indicators are not necessarily financial, they have another nature. It's probably the best way of convincing someone who still has doubts why ethics is important, but also is a challenge for us doing this journey, because we push ourselves to get out of our bubble of thinking ethically and actually see how a value embedded into a process or in a technology actually delivers a better or a worse outcome. So I think it's coming from both ways. It's a challenge for us to come together and making sure that we are able to not quantify ethics, which is a qualitative indicator to my mind. It's easy, but being able to link it to the existing performance indicator and say, this is how it influences both negative and positive, a specific indicator.
If you assume that the company's values contributes to brand value, or their values contribute to the company's ability to attract and employ good people, you could see how the ethics of an AI system, which are supposed to embed the company's values, could be could contribute to those same things that matter to that executive, right? If the CFO believes that the brand is important and is an asset, then you have to connect the ethics of an AI system back through the company values to the to the brand value. It's an extra step. It takes an education process where you actually, first of all, I would imagine part of the challenge is getting audience with the executive to convince them of this. You have to get them to give you time to educate them on why this matters before you then put down the project in front of them to say, this is what we want to go do.
Spot on. Yes, that's a challenge and a quest for creativity and courage for each of us. And in the current context is a little bit more difficult because I think the priorities have changed fundamentally. And I don't think that anyone has now time for reflection. But also in the same time, what I'm trying to experiment is to come together with data scientists and use our scientific power to prove this, right? So we, instead of us going holistically and say we should be doing this as a corporate level or strategy level, we go at the product level. So we identify, for example, a use case that we know it has the potential to have impact on the organization. The organization has got the right support for that project to go ahead, and then we use this as a vehicle to demonstrate this. Because usually, when you demonstrate on a piece of paper, it's a little bit more difficult to comprehend, and sometimes people are a bit more skeptical. But if you demonstrate it in a live situation, I think it's much easier to bring it to life, and then it's a lasting moment. It's something that we have seen actually part of the coronavirus work, and the fact people are much more inclined to engage into actions rather than conversations or debates. So I think it's the time now for us to come together as a diverse team, data scientists and engineers and people working in compliance and legal and being able to articulate this so it's comprehensive, but it's part of a project and it's live. And we can actually demonstrate that when you have a decision option and you go on route A versus route B, we are able to showcase at least give a flavor of the consequences.
It makes me wonder whether one of the ways that we could think differently about ethics is to frame it much more as, here are the decisions that a human needs to make about this system. Now, you let the system be what it is, be as big or as small as it needs to be. But we're going to sit down and figure out, here are the key decisions that always need to be made by a human. So putting that almost sort of hard-coded yes and no in the front. When having a conversation with someone recently that said that the system could do whatever it wants unless it's someone under the age of 16. And then in these situations, no predictions go out for anyone, a user under the age of 16 that are in this category. And that's a very tangible ethical decision that constrains a particular part of the output of the model. It doesn't change the model, doesn't change the data in the model, it doesn't change the recommendation that's made by the model, but it changes what actually gets delivered to the user. So there's an extra layer that gets built so that thinking about ethics less as, it always needs to be about inputs, it always needs to be about translating those values, but when you're trying to be more tangible, maybe it's a time to shift to we're going to talk about the output layer. We're going to talk about things that a human specifically stops the AI from going to the user. And then it's a very tangible, like we're going to lower the risk of this happening, or it's much more measurable in that respect.
It always should be about the outcome, right? And that's why performing the impact assessment it's so critical. It's something that we haven't had to do for previous technology, and the fact that now we need to understand what is the actual impact those technology will have on various intended user and unintended users. So I do quite a lot of work with UNICEF and World Economic Forum on AI for children. And I think this is exactly the type of question it kind of keeps us awake is we know children are around technology, we're not designed for them, but yet they still use it and still interact with it. So how can we think of extra gateways and controls in place for the governance of this technology to better protect those who need protection? But in terms of what you said, I wonder, yes, it's a great approach, and theoretically it sounds like it should work. But it makes me wonder that in times like this, when we're going to see fight for survival, so we're going to get out of lockdown into a fully fledged recession. Companies will fight for survival, and the prime priorities will be, how can I optimize my cost and be more efficient? Because obviously revenues or increasing revenues, it's a long shot, if not out of the question. And in this quest, they will be looking at application of technology to help them do that. And even if we have a list where we say yes and no, I think this could be easily thrown up in the air because the decision makers is put with a much more fundamental life or death situation. And the way I think we should, at least for the next period, to actually work hand in hand with those guys and make sure that they recognize us as partners in this journey. And it was Kay Butterfield from WEF that has talked extensively about responsible AI during the coronavirus, and something that we highlight over and over again, that the risk associated with this technology, even if you use it for the most boring application in cost optimization and efficiency, they're still there. So we still need to be looking at the risk associated. Then guess what? A lot of the risk associated are derived from unethical behavior. So that's a way to approach it. It's a change in narrative to make sure that we understand that we need this technology for survival of many organizations and overall the economy. But in the same time, ethics needs to be not an afterthought, not a nice to have, but a must have. because in this context, deploying ethical technology can actually address much more than we originally thought. And the narrative we say is that in a context where you have a lot of pressing issues, a lot of the unknown risk and situation, you don't need technology to go rogue when you need to rely most of it. And in order to have a reliable technology, you have to go through this process that we call responsible AI. You have to be able to have governance, you have to be able to look at risk management, and yes, you have to be able to consider ethics in a transparent manner. So the embedment of ethics is the narrative is turned around, but the processes will still be there.
When you talk about fighting for survival, which I think is probably it is definitely true. Is there any room for ethics, or is fighting for survival just literally fighting for survival? And the last thing that's on your mind is whether you do anything for good.
Well, it's an excellent question, and is something that we need to be doing as AI community and those who work in ethics of technology. We need to make sure that we are present when the decisions are being made. The fact that those contract tracing apps, although at the moment the way they're being designed, they don't have a lot of AI in it. Ultimately, we talk about ethics of technology in general. And the fact that on one hand, we have a vacuum of regulation in relation with technology. On the other hand, decision being made with the rationale of literally saving lives. We need to find the best way of engaging with those decision makers via, let's say, independent oversight bodies that are able to challenge those decisions, especially where we're talking about technology implemented at a society level. If we go down a level to organizations and go back to, yes, it's survival, why should we talk about ethics? Is we need to be very strong on articulating why ethics with the risk angle. And as I said before, the fact that we need a reliable technology, that we can, we have a degree of confidence that it delivers what it says it does what it says on the tin. There are no shortcuts. And sooner or later, if we go ahead without this consideration, things will break. And then we'll have to deal with the consequences. And in some cases, the decision might be to go ahead without this analysis, which is fine. It's not much lever you have, but I'm hoping that we will find a way, leader by leader, organization by organization, to make this point. And perhaps for ourselves as being a consultancy, as long as with our colleagues and competitors from the consultancy industry and professional services, is because we are advising the decision makers around the society, both public and private. We should get it first. We should get our act together and have that narrative that is as bulletproof as possible. Because now it's the time when we will see how much damage this technology can bring without the right governance and control in place.
At some point over the next number of months or years, however long this recovery takes, we're going to go through one of the biggest recruitment and hiring cycles we've ever seen. We've got millions and millions of people that have filed for unemployment here in the United States. In order to have a functioning economy, eventually they will get hired again and go back to work. How are the AI systems going to handle that? How will they decide who gets hired and who doesn't? What's the long-term impact of that on a society? And on a practical nature for the companies, what is the long-term impact on their human resources, who they have employed, the diversity that they either have or don't have in terms of their people, the right talent that they hire or don't, the long-term reputational risk and brand risk if it turns out that we look back in some number of years and realize that the high-end AI recruiting system hired all the wrong people, or didn't follow through on the company values of choosing people based on whatever their values are.
Or what cultural fit means today is different than what it means in a year. I mean, that's the ultimate fungible factor in those things.
Yeah.
That's indeed it's a challenge, and it's a bigger challenge because especially the automated hiring systems, no matter how performant they are in detecting biases, because some of the providers in this space, they actually offer a full package that comes with an audit of AI, so that you are able to self-assess yourself how fair your application is based on the data you have used. I think it's something that we miss, the fact that recruitment is a process that is automated more and more, meaning that on a recruitment process, at the moment we have a certain degree of automation depending on each companies and tools that are being used. But even if one part carries a certain degree of bias, that is going to be propagated along the rest of the process on automated. So in effect, that you end up automating bias without even being aware. And that goes beyond the data use and the fact that in recruitment, we tend to use historical data that we know it carries a certain degree of bias. But also is the other element. We think of bias always as something negative, and we try to associate bias with unfairness and inequality and oppression. But in the same time, bias has another connotation. If you speak with a data scientist, they will be looking at bias as a natural trait of the model. And if you speak with a psychologists, you say, in fact, bias is that ability of the humans that allow us to survive and thrive, because it's a shortcut in the way the brain operates. So how can we look at bias not always through those lenses as a need to identify what's special for that organization while we provide equal opportunities for everyone? And it's going to be an interesting experiment. The optimist in me says that although we have no other way of going ahead with it because it will be required, I feel we are in a better position to identify situation when we've had outrageous breaches of equality rights and human rights, and we are able to at least bring it up to light and go back and correct it. But in a way, I feel like we need to be brave and balance it up. I think in between addressing inequality and survival for everyone, I know which one I choose, and being able to keep an eye and always being challenging, because addressing inequality is such a big task of humanity. We're not going to solve it, even if we aim to develop the latest technology to address bias in our technology. We know that we need to go back to the root cause, to something that's much more fundamental. But I think we also have an opportunity to see how it will manifest itself. And I would say use it an experiment, but because we have an increased degree of transparency and more specialists that are keeping their antenna up, and we have an increased confidence in our collective voice, I hope that we will be able to push back whenever this is going to become a societal problem. But we have to be a little bit brave and go ahead with it. I feel we don't have a choice, but in the same time, it's okay for us to go and fail, because it's the only way for us to correct whatever is wrong. At the moment, we're just making a lot of assumptions, but we wouldn't know when this will be fully fleshed and used at society level what will mean.
Do you think that technology ethics can be a competitive advantage?
Yeah, the sad reality of companies are the big gap in between companies who are quite mature in understanding and using technology to generate value and the ones that are not. I think what we will see during those times is fallout of the companies who are not able to do what we have been discussing that it is the only way ahead, which is their fundamental transformation. And this is much more profound than just AI, which is I would say it's the spearhead of the technology world. You can't really talk about AI if your infrastructure is fragmented and crap. You're still using on-premise, and only a low percent of your operation are cloud-based. So I think we will see now winners and losers. The ones that have actually understood and embraced technology truly in the last few years, and AI, it's going to make a difference, but I would say it's not going to make the significant difference because, again, the certain capabilities are required for AI to be able to function and scale and produce impact and scale. And before that, you need to be building yourself that capability, technology capability that someone like big tech companies will have. People like Bezos, he understood that it's all about a robust technology foundation. Is the same with Google. They very quickly understood that cloud computing is the future. And I would say their success lie on understanding this. The owning infrastructure, it's the key to success. Not necessary that they have developed the most sophisticated AI models. Without a proper infrastructure, of course, you can't even talk about training a model. So the crisis will have some winners and losers, and it will be unfair, probably. But we also think that will be others that will take advantage and will come with a fresh perspective. Sometimes it's good to acknowledge that systems can only be updated up to a certain point before they break. Afterwards, you have to start from the scratch. So maybe new business models will emerge to take the place of the business that will fall, as we've seen it in the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah, I think there's definitely there's a potential for an echo with the changes that came after the introduction of the commercial internet and then the dot-com bust, where so many companies that were lagging in adopting a new technology got left behind. And those that really embraced it, some were brand new companies and some were old companies that just embraced the new technology and actually understood it and really pursued it. But it's definitely challenging for those who are struggling the most at the moment. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I always love chatting with Helen. I think we expand each other's minds and challenging questions. So, and also, I'm keen to apply the knowledge to other areas of my work outside PwC, and mainly in the space of AI in children. I've been recently appointed as an expert advisor for UNICEF in their AI for Children program, an initiative that's very close to my heart. And I'm working closely with World Economic Forum on their similar project. And I hope that more in the community will join us, because it's not just about the decision we make right now on that will depend our future. Is how do we look after our children, and how do we make sure that technology that is more and more around their lives is built and managed in a right way. So this is probably one of the message I would like to send out there to everyone. Please join us. We will soon come back with initiatives and a call for help and evidence. And we rely on the fact that we all love our children, and they deserve a truly bright future ahead, where technology will boost their potential rather than increase the potential harms. So thank you very much for having me.
Oh, thank you.